The transport that brought her was built for cargo, not dignity, and when its ramp ground down into the red dust of Hadron's Reach, the thing that walked out of it was so small that two of the loading cadets actually laughed before they remembered they were on duty. I was standing at the edge of the receiving yard with my manifest slate, because that is what a quartermaster does. He stands at the edge of things and counts them. I counted her as one unit, soft-bodied, bipedal, roughly two-thirds the height of an average Vorall recruit and perhaps a fifth of the mass. She took one step onto our world and our gravity took hold of her, and I watched her shoulders drop and her knees lock and her whole frame shudder like a structure deciding whether to stand or fall. Hadron's Reach pulls at 3 times what most species are bred for. We are bred for it. She, manifestly, was not. She stood there breathing in slow, deliberate pulls, the way you breathe when each breath has a price, and she did not fall, and I made a small mark on my slate next to her name. Edith Sarmiento, Exchange Cadet, Fleet Referral, no combat citations listed, no physical scores attached. Nothing attached at all, in fact, which I noticed even then, because in my profession the absence of paperwork is louder than the presence of it. You have to understand what we are, the Vorall, to understand why the entire receiving yard treated her arrival as a joke that had been delivered to the wrong address. We are a people who measure worth in bone density. I mean that almost literally. Our oldest word for honored and our oldest word for heavy share a root. A Vorall child is weighed more often than it is praised. Our war colleges do not admit you on the basis of your mind. They admit you on the basis of how much of the world you can move and how much of the world's punishment you can absorb before you stop moving. And HFY, where I have kept the supply ledgers for 31 years, is the heaviest of all the heavy places, the war college that other war colleges send their failures to die in. So when a creature arrived who looked as though a strong wind off the salt flats might fold her in half, the only question anyone bothered to ask was how many days she would last. I did not ask it, because I am a quartermaster and I deal in what is, not what is funny. But everyone else asked it, and the man who asked it loudest with the most teeth showing was Senior Instructor Taran. He looked down at her from his enormous height, and he smiled the way a landslide smiles, and he said the first of the many predictions he would get wrong. I keep all my records. I can tell you it was a prediction because I wrote it down. What I could not tell you, standing there in the red dust, was why Fleet had sent us something this fragile, or why, when she looked up at the man twice her height, she did not look afraid. She looked, if I am honest, like she was taking inventory. To grasp what came after, you have to grasp the machine she had walked into, because HFY is a machine and Taran was its proudest gear. Rank at the college is not given. It is taken, physically in the training pits, and it can be taken back from you the same way. A cadet who outlifts you can demand your bunk. A cadet who pins you can demand your rations. The instructors do not intervene in this because they believe sincerely, religiously, that strength is the only honest language and that a hierarchy sorted by force is a hierarchy sorted by truth. Taran had risen through that system without ever once losing a contest of mass, and he taught the way he had risen, through humiliation administered as a kindness. He genuinely believed he was being kind. Break the weak early, he liked to say, and you spare them the more expensive death of breaking late. His first week was engineered to do exactly that. The acclimation trials, the load marches, the pit. By the end of it, the bottom third of any intake class had usually quit, washed out, or been carried to the infirmary, and Taran considered each departure a successful surgery. I had watched him do it to hundreds. I had ordered the extra ration packs for the ones who stayed and quietly struck the names of the ones who left. It was, I had come to believe, simply how the universe was shaped here. So when he looked at this small soft thing and announced to the assembled yard that she would break by the gravity drills, that he doubted she would last to the third dawn, nobody disagreed. I least of all. I had already in my head struck her name. I am not proud of that. A quartermaster is supposed to count what is in front of him, and I had let the laughter count for me. The gravity drills are the first real test, and they are designed not to be passed but to be survived. You stand. That is the whole of it. You stand, holding a graduated load against the full pull of Hadron's reach, and you keep standing while the load is increased at intervals, and you are not permitted to set it down until an instructor permits it, and the instructors are in no hurry. Volk-Taran ran that first drill himself because he wanted to watch her go down. The Voral cadets approached it the way we always have, as a contest, chests out, loads snatched up fast and high, each of them trying to take more weight than the cadet beside him to establish position before the class had even properly begun. And one by one, predictably, the show-offs paid for it. You cannot brood a thing whose entire purpose is duration. Edith did none of that. She took the lightest permitted starting load, settled it low and close against her center, and then she did something I had never seen any cadet do, which was nothing. She breathed. Long, metered, expensive breaths. She did not lock her joints. She let them bend a hair and float the weight on her skeleton instead of her muscle. When the load increased, she did not brace against it dramatically. She exhaled, accepted it, and redistributed. She finished dead last in every measurable sense, lowest load, slowest, least impressive to watch. And she was also, when Volk-Taran finally and irritably called the drill, one of only 9 cadets still upright, and the only one of those 9 who was not shaking. I remember this precisely because she walked past my supply station afterward, and she was not gasping, and she glanced at the doctrine board bolted to the wall, the regulation posture diagrams, the ones nobody reads, and she glanced at it the way you glance at something you wrote a long time ago and had forgotten you knew so well. After that I started watching her, the way a quartermaster watches anything that doesn't reconcile. The field exercises came next, the long endurance hauls out across the flats, and here the pattern of her became clearer to me even as it stayed invisible to everyone else. The other cadets treated each exercise as an audition. They sprinted the early kilometers to be seen sprinting, they fought over the lead, they carried their loads high and visible so the instructors would mark their strength. Edith did not compete for any of it. She took the rear every time. She took the unglamorous duty nobody wanted, the water, the ration crates, the medical kit, the dead weight that earns no glory and slows you down, and she hauled it without complaint at the back of the column where no instructor bothered to look. And while she hauled it, she watched. I'm the only one who saw what was in her hands at night, because supply is the only building lit after curfew, and she started coming to supply. She had a notebook, an actual physical notebook paper, which on a world like ours is nearly an affectation. And I assumed, the way you assume, that it was a private thing, a comfort, a soft creature's diary of her suffering. It was not a diary. I caught a glimpse of a page once when she set it down to sign for a ration draw, and it was a list. Routes. Timings, failure points, the exact interval at which the water resupply ran dry on the eastern flats, the name of the cadet who collapsed and the distance at which he collapsed and the load he had been carrying when he did. She was not recording her ordeal. She was recording ours. Volk-Taran, when he noticed her at the rear of every column, took it as confirmation of everything. He announced she would break by the night march. I wrote that down too. The wargame simulation is where the college first stops being about lifting and starts being about thinking, and it is also, not coincidentally, where Volk-Taran first made a mistake he could not laugh off. The simulation pits cadet squads against one another over contested ground, and the instructor seeds it deliberately, assigning the weakest cadets to a throwaway position, so the strong squads can rack up a clean victory and learn the taste of dominance. He put Edith in the throwaway position. He all but told the favored squad, Taran's own proteges, the heaviest and proudest cadets in the intake, that she was the soft underbelly, the easy flank, the place to win their reputations. And they believed him because why wouldn't they? They had watched her finish last at everything for 2 weeks. So they came for her hard and fast and early, the whole muscular weight of them committed to crushing the small thing on the weak flank. And the small thing was not there. She had read them exactly as she had read the gravity board and the resupply intervals. She had let them see a weakness, because a weakness is the most reliable bait there is for a creature that has been taught its whole life to charge at weakness. She gave ground and gave it, drawing their overconfident mass further and further out of formation and further from their own supports, until the heavy squad was strung across open ground, exhausted and overextended and entirely committed. And then her scattered, overlooked little group, who had not spent a single gram of energy on glory, simply closed the gap behind them and took the objective the favored squad had abandoned in their hunger. No contest of strength occurred. None was needed. She won by understanding precisely how a Voral squad would behave when it smelled an easy kill, and by being the only one on the field who had spent 2 weeks studying that instead of showing off. Vogue Taran called it a fluke. He said it loudly, and he said it twice, which is how I knew it had frightened him. Frightened men reach for the lever they understand, and the lever Vogue Taran understood was punishment. He could not fail her on the scores, because her scores, by the cold arithmetic of survival and outcome, had quietly become unembarrassing. So he did what petty power always does when it cannot win on merit. He found a posting low enough to be an insult and called it discipline. He assigned Edith Sarmiento to permanent logistics and supply duty, to me, in other words, to the back rooms and the ledgers and the ration counts, the place at HFY where, in his words, the unfit could make themselves marginally useful before they washed out for good. The whole intake heard him do it. The whole intake laughed, because to a Voral cadet there is no posting more contemptible than supply. We are the ones who count the food while the warriors eat it. He thought he was burying her. I remember the exact shape of his satisfaction. And I remember thinking, even as I logged her transfer into my own ledger, that he had just made the single stupidest decision of his career, because Vogue Taran, for all his mass, had never once in 30 years understood what supply actually is. Supply is not where the college hides its failures. Supply is where the college keeps its truth. Every route, every shortfall, every falsified endurance record, every cadet quietly carried off the flats and quietly struck from the rolls, every gram of food and water and medicine that flows through HFY, it all passes across my counter and into my ledgers. He had taken the one creature in the college who knew how to read, and he had handed her the keys to the archive. I said nothing. A quartermaster says nothing. But that night, when she came to begin her exile among the crates, she looked at the shelves of records the way she had looked at the doctrine board, and she said the first full sentence I ever heard her say to me. She said, "Thank you. This is exactly where I needed to be." And I did not yet understand her, but I understood, the way you understand a change in air pressure, that something very large was about to happen in a very quiet room. The night coordination march is the exercise that has killed more HFY cadets than any other, and it is the one Vogue Taran was most certain would finish her. It sends the entire intake out across the worst terrain on Hadron's Reach in full dark, in scattered units, with no central command, and tasks them only with getting back. It is meant to break the bonds between cadets, to prove that under enough pressure every Voral is alone with his own strength, and that the strong return and the weak do not. Historically, it works. Historically, cadets scatter, the strong abandon the slow, units lose cohesion in the dark, and the casualty list the next morning is long and the instructors nod over it with grim approval. Edith was not even permitted to march as a cadet anymore. She marched as supply, at the very rear, hauling the reserve water and the medical reserve, the lowest of the low. And from that lowest position in the dark, where no instructor was watching and no glory was possible, she did the thing that I will tell my grandchildren about. She built a network. Quietly, with nothing but timing and ration logic, and the relationships she had spent weeks forming with all the overlooked cadets at the backs of all the columns. She established a rolling chain of resupply and relay across the killing flats. She knew exactly where the water would run out because she had logged it. She knew exactly which cadets would falter, and when because she had logged that too. She did not save them with strength. She saved them with arithmetic, by ensuring that water and rest and a guiding voice arrived at each failure point a few minutes before the failure did. The next morning, HFY recorded its first night march in the history of the college with 0 casualties and 0 stragglers. Every cadet came home. Volk-Taran stood in front of that result and could not process it, and so he reached one more time for his lever. He announced, and I wrote it down, the last of his predictions that she would break by the live exercise. The capstone live exercise is the only event at HFY that uses real ordnance, real terrain seizures, real consequences, and Volk-Taran built that year's scenario personally, which is to say he built it as an instrument to destroy one specific cadet. He stacked the conditions against the supply units. He weighted the scoring toward raw assault and physical seizure, the things she could not do. He assigned his own elite proteges, the heaviest and most decorated cadets in the college, as the dominant force, and he made sure everyone understood that the exercise existed to demonstrate, finally and publicly, the natural and proper order of strength. And Edith Sarmiento, from the contemptible position of supply command, took it apart so completely that the recordings are still studied. She did not field an army. She had no army to field. She had a network, the entire overlooked underclass of the college, every cadet who had ever been mocked and sent to the rear, every quiet, competent, unglamorous one whose name Volk-Taran had never bothered to learn. All of them organized over weeks into something that did not look like a fighting force and was therefore invisible to a man who only recognized force. She let his elite squad seize every objective they charged at, because she had already understood that an objective you cannot supply is an objective you cannot hold. And then, methodically, bloodlessly, without a single cadet of hers ever closing into a contest of strength, she severed his squads from their water, from their ammunition relays, from their lines of communication, from each other. She did to the whole exercise what she had done to one squad in the simulation, scaled up across the entire battlefield, and by the time the live exercise was called, Volk-Taran's invincible elite were stranded across the flats, dominant, exhausted, victorious over every position, and in possession of nothing, surrounded by an enemy they had never been able to see because they had been trained their whole lives to look only for muscle. The result was not close. It was the most lopsided outcome in the recorded history of the college, and it had been achieved by a creature who, in 3 full weeks, had never once lifted more than she could carry comfortably or struck a single blow. And here is where the story bends, the way these stories always bend, on something small. Volk-Taran, humiliated past the point of strategy, did the only thing left to a man like him. He moved to expel her. He stood in the administration hall the morning after the exercise and he declared, with all the fury of a landslide that has finally noticed it is falling, that the result was a fraud, that an unfit cadet had corrupted the exercise through trickery, that she would be struck from the rolls before midday and sent back to fleet as the failure she had always been. He was mid-sentence, I am told, building toward the cruelest part, when the courier signal arrived. It came in on the priority fleet channel, the one that bypasses the college command entirely, and it carried an authentication that turned every officer in that hall the color of old ash, because Edith Sarmiento was not an exchange cadet. There was no failing soft creature for Volk-Taran to expel. The reason her file had carried no physical scores and no combat citations, the absence I had noticed in the red dust on the very first day, and let the laughter explain away, was that she had never been a cadet at all. She was a fleet doctrine auditor, dispatched to HFY under cover to evaluate whether the college was still fit to train officers for a galaxy that no longer fought its wars with bone density. She had spent 3 weeks doing precisely what an auditor does, which is to live inside a system as its lowest member and record every place it lied to itself. And the cruelest detail, the one that I think killed something in Volk-Taran that no contest ever could have, came last. The training manual he had taught from for 9 years, the doctrine he recited, the postures, the principles, the very diagrams bolted to the wall that she had glanced at on her first day like an old friend, she had written it. Every page. The auditor he had assigned to count ration crates was the author of the words he had built his whole authority upon, and he had spent 3 weeks teaching her doctrine back to her and calling her too weak to understand it. She left quietly, the way she had done everything quietly. There was no triumph in her, no speech, no settling of scores. An auditor does not gloat, because to an auditor the report is the only revenge that matters and the report writes itself. Volk-Taran was not executed or imprisoned. We are past that mostly, but his career ended in that administration hall as completely as if he had been, and HFY was restructured within the year around the things she had proven on its own flats. That endurance beats display, that the cadet at the rear with the water is worth more than the cadet at the front with the trophy, that a force you cannot supply is a force you do not have, and that the entire ancient Voral faith in mass as the measure of worth was a comfortable lie that any patient enemy could take apart. I keep the new manuals on my shelves now beside the old ones, and I notice that the new ones are also hers, though she never came back to tell us so. I am only a quartermaster. I stand at the edge of things and I count them, and I have had a long time since then to count what I watched. Here is the sum I keep arriving at, and I offer it to you as the only thing I am truly qualified to say. We laughed at her because she was frail, and we were not wrong that she was frail, she was. That was never the mistake. The mistake was believing that the strength we could see was the only strength there was. The strength you can measure is the strength your enemy can measure too, and the strength your enemy can measure is the strength your enemy can defeat. It is the unmeasured strengths that finish you, the patience, the attention, the willingness to carry the water nobody wants to carry. The long, quiet labor in the rooms no one bothers to watch. A whole species spent its history weighing its children, and not one of us ever thought to ask what could not be weighed. She did. And by the time we learned her true name, the answer was already written down, in a small paper notebook, in a soft creature's careful hand, at the back of every column we ever sent her to die in.